The Kremlin wants you to watch the front line. They show you the tanks, the artillery, the speeches about unbreakable resolve. That is the first war, the war of spectacle. Ultimately, every single dictatorship survives by changing what the camera sees. But behind the spectacle, another war is being fought. A war of numbers, not of morale. A war fought in spreadsheets, on insurance manifests, and inside the empty treasuries of bankrupted regions. This war is fought with calculators, not with Kalashnikovs. Because in this war, this system itself is collapsing. While a general may boast on television of his great successes, a governor in Arkhangelsk is looking at his $1.56 billion budget and realizing that he only has $500,000. An oil tanker bound for India has its insurance suddenly canceled. A Moscow procurement chief is purged. These are not isolated failures, but they are single fracture lines that we see spreading through the entire state. Today, Russia is being challenged. Russia's narrative is giving way to arithmetic. The balance sheet tells the real story. And today, it is flashing red. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor. The situation for Russia is quite interesting in the sense that it is getting really bad. And what's the most interesting is that the Russians aren't hiding it like they used to. More and more, they are forced to admit that the situation is out of control. And that's simply because today, the numbers speak for themselves. There's no way to hide when you have these sorts of losses. Look at August. Offline refinery capacity hit a record 6.4 million tons. Ryazan output, it halved. Novosibirsk, it halted after strikes there. Ust-Luga, the repairs since 2024 are still ongoing. Russia does not have the capacity to wage war because it doesn't have the money to wage war. It doesn't have the parts to fix its factories. Russia is extending its gasoline export ban. Crimea is imposing more rationing on the buying of fuel. Throughout the entire country, we see the same thing. It is impossible for Russia to keep it all together. India today is barring sanctioned tankers across 14 different ports. The UK, the EU, and the United States are bringing more sanctions against Russia. Today, Russia is in a situation where it keeps telling everybody that things are fine, but the numbers speak for themselves. We see that they are not able to pay their employees. We see that more and more Russians are showing up to protest. Things are going quite the opposite from how Vladimir Putin probably envisioned for his 3-day special military operation. So that's why Ukraine will win. Ukraine has the resolve, the discipline, the morale, and the desire to win. Russia does not. Russia is a country that is falling apart in front of us. It is disintegrating as a model. But many do not know that. Many people still today believe that Russia will win. We've recently heard that in statements from the White House. The president does not believe that Ukraine can win. All you have to do is please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider becoming a channel member today. Many people who are subscribers have said that recently they're no longer getting the notifications. So please make sure that you are subscribed to the channel still and we're not unsubscribed. But either way, I appreciate greatly your support for Ukraine and that you are here watching this program, which shows that you are interested in the future and are not indifferent to this war being fought in Europe. Thank you. So looking ahead, what do we see? Well, we see that Ukraine's strikes today are the ones that are defining the pace of this war. Fuel and cash drive movement, repairs, morale. But when both of those are disrupted, armies slow and regimes begin to weaken. And many blows combine into a systemic strain. Transport, storage, refining choke points, they amplify the damage with each one of these hits. And that's the objective here. It's to become cumulative in nature. These are not one-offs. Though as much as anyone else, I enjoy seeing the refineries get hit. That will not change the war. Not that one refinery. It's the magnitude of the refineries, the number of them being hit that will change this war. And history proves fuel starvation, it ends wars. In 1944, Germany's tanks stood idle as its fuel vanished. Its armies, they ground to a halt. In 1991, Iraq's war machine froze when coalition strikes erased its refineries and fuel lines. In 1942, something very similar happened. Rommel's panzers sat stranded in Libyan sands as Allied convoys choked his fuel supply. With empty tanks, the Desert Fox became prey. The campaign ended not with a charge, but with a stall. Reuters data today shows that the refineries have reached a new record. At least 19 of Russia's 38 refineries have been struck since August 2025. 30 of those attacks were confirmed by the Russians. What is amazing is that, one, Russia is not able to defend itself, but two, it's forced to confirm these attacks. Now, some of these refineries were hit multiple times, but today we see what the result of that is. Diesel exports slid toward multi-year lows as outages have been spreading. Each strike now lands faster than the Kremlin can repair them. Drone adaptation cycles have outpaced Moscow's defense development. Ukraine learns very quickly. It's recalibrating weekly, and each wave is cheaper than the last. What else we see is that Russia really cannot repair its refineries. It does the theater that it wishes to repair them, but repairs are stalled because of bureaucrats. Incredibly enough, it's not just the sanctions that make the repairs hard, it is that Russia is a top-down system. This vertical power, it causes regional bureaucrats or local leaders to wait for Moscow to approve changes, to wait for Moscow to send the parts. They cannot act individually. And as a result, everything gets further muddied. We saw something already in the Russian military. You've seen the problem that they've had with not having non-commissioned officers. The fact that so many generals got killed because there's a choke-up in a point, and the general himself has come out and resolved things. Senior officers have to come themselves and resolve things that, realistically, in no Western army would they do that. They would not expose themselves like that. But in Russia, they have to, because there's no other way. There's no good organization. Unless the very top gives an order, nobody acts. So today, these repeated attacks by Ukraine are causing Russia significant problems. But the sanctions, they're also causing problems that the Russians cannot get around. Now, initially, they were able to get around sanctions, and eventually they will. Give them enough time. But overall, it's something that will be a constant headache. It makes things much more expensive and much slower. But look at the strain that we see throughout the country. Not just Crimea. In Crimea, we see obviously that there have been a cap on the purchases of gasoline. Now it's about 30 liters or 8 gallons per car. And the bottleneck has reached other areas as well, not just the occupied territories. Outside of Moscow, we've seen this as well. Throughout the country, though, people believe that the situation is getting worse. New data out of Russia shows that the vast majority of Russians believe that the country is on the wrong track. They do not believe that the country is going to head the right way. And in fact, when you look at what's coming out from the government, it sort of supports that. Because today, we see that the pressure is not only in fuel, it is in finance. Inflation policy is now reactive and not strategic. The central bank faces a guns versus butter trap. Cut rates and fuel inflation. Tighten and choke war production. Official guidance admits hotter inflation for longer than they had initially said. Next year's inflation sits near 4 to 5%. This year's range is 6.5 to 7%. But in fact, in 2026, the range may average closer to 13 to 15%. The key rate was cut back in October 24th, but today we see something interesting happening. We see that the Russians are not responding well to that. Despite the fact that it is now cheaper to get money, they feel that the situation is eroding. They don't feel that today the situation will improve. And that's why the stock market in Russia is showing more and more red days, where major companies in Russia continue to just bleed money. Russia's fiscal buffer is continuing to erode. The liquid assets in the National Wealth Fund, they sit at about 1.8, 1.9% of GDP. Today, about 48 billion of that money remains. Tax hikes are now planned, as you know, on the local businesses. There's also going to be a VAT increase from 20 to 22%. Small businesses already are going insolvent. Adding this to this will not make it any better. And the problems that Russia has go beyond just that. Look at the structural pressure being added by the European Union. The new sanctions on importing Russian LNG, that's very good. Brussels now inspecting shadow tankers, that will be very good. The crude cap has been lowered to $47.6 per barrel in July. What that means for Russia is less and less profit. They're already giving steep discounts to the Chinese and Indians. But globally, Russia's going to have a harder and harder time selling its wares. Look at the case of India. They're already blocking sanctioned vessels at 14 different ports. Each broker today is finding his own reasons to not do business with the Russians. And if he continues to do business, he wants a very good cut, because he is now risking a great deal. Russia has very few friends that it can just get to help. It has friends whom it can pay, but it doesn't have the money to pay them. Sanctions do not shout. They are something that suffocate. They are something that erode a country over time. And today, we're seeing an erosion in real time. Consider this. The collapse is most visible at the regional level. As of September 1st, more than a month and a half ago, 6 regions held under 1% of their annual budgets. That's about 2 to 5 days of coverage. By late October, those reserves are gone. That means that Moscow must intervene. But reports confirm that nearly all the reserves have been exhausted, and today it is widening the debt month to month. Those deficits are getting worse. They are surviving on deferrals and emergency transfers. These are not functioning administrations. They are financial triage centers. Look at the case of Arkhangelsk in the far north. Their annual budget is typically about $1.6 billion. However, they only had about $500,000 left as of September 1st. That's going to be very difficult to stretch through the rest of the year. In Kalmykia, they only had about 0.1% of the money they needed for the rest of the year. In Volgograd, they only had $1.2 million left from their $2.4 billion projected budget. Belgorod, they only had $2.5 million from their $2.3 billion budget. Ulyanovsk said they could only survive for 1 to 2 more days. You go through the list, it is one city after another, one region after another that it lacks solvency. Today, we see that they will not be able to continue. And there's a very simple reason for that. Real revenues have fallen in 53 regions across Russia, once one calculates for inflation. But the government cannot admit that inflation is that bad. Remember, the numbers that they use for accounting are different than the numbers that people are experiencing in day-to-day lives. And that's why today people have gone through their entire budgets for the year before it's end of the year. So how can the Russian government continue like this? How could it continue to fight a war when its own regions cannot continue to operate? Well, we've seen in all these regions, they're doing the same things. They're closing down the hospitals. They're closing down the schools. They're just not paying the teachers. So the schools do operate. I should correct myself. They just don't get paid to teach. So today what we see is that the government of Russia has had to make a decision how it will continue to fight this war, if it can continue to fight this war. But the truth of the matter is, well, the truth is that it speaks for itself. Russia cannot afford to continue this war. It does not have the financial resources. It does not have the technology. It does not have the soldiers. And it does not have a population that's very keen to see this war continue. Today in Russia, the situation is becoming worse. And for the first time in ages, we're seeing average Russians express their great dissatisfaction with their poor government leadership. So today, no matter what the press says, keep this in mind. The situation for Ukraine is getting ever better. Ukraine is determined. Ukraine is winning. And Ukraine will win. Russia, the country that started this war, is suffering not just setbacks, but suffering the signs of a defeat that is imminent. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider becoming a channel member today. And if you are interested in supporting the Ukrainian soldiers by giving them drones that save their lives, please see the first comment below. And if you're a scientist who would like to donate your knowledge, please also see the first link below. And even if you're not a scientist, check out that link. Perhaps you know somebody else who could benefit from that information. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.